So, Bogna Konior, thanks very much for joining me on Hermitix podcast. We are going to be discussing your book, The Dark Forest Theory of the Internet, which was published by Polity Press. And a big thank you to them for sending me over a review copy. And this is a book that draws on a discussion. Well, it's a discussion on intelligence relating to both human and artificial intelligence, with a theory of intelligence that is related to sort of secrecy, silence, concealment, but also at the same time drawing on Liu Cixin's Three Body Problem trilogy, which I believe the first book was also turned into a TV show. So if people are familiar with that book, they might be familiar with the terms in the title. But it's a fascinating short book that is extremely original when it comes to kind of internet theory and theories of intelligence. And I don't kind of want to spoil your own theories with my own explanations of them. So, Bogna, tell us a little bit about yourself and the origins of your book.
Okay. Hi, James. Such a pleasure to be on the podcast. I will first introduce myself and the book, and then we can dive deeper into the contents. So about myself, I am a writer and a researcher with an interest in new and emerging technologies, and specifically artificial intelligence over the last years. I am Polish. I live between China and Ukraine. In China, I am based at NYU Shanghai. I spend roughly 8 months a year there, and the remaining time I spend in Ukraine, where I do research for my next book on artificial intelligence and Eastern Europe. Most recently, I edited a book titled Machine Decision is Not Final, China and the History and Future of AI with Urbanomic, which is a collection of essays, sort of like a companion piece to the solo book, The Dark Forest Theory of the Internet, which we will discuss today. Something generally about my writing is that I write about technologies not as political instruments or economic systems, but rather through like the broad tradition of the humanities, right? So philosophy, arts, culture, religion, theology, languages. And I find we have produced in general, like very few, like real serious works of philosophy of the internet. Technology is very often reduced to like political debates. And this book is trying to be very different. In my books, I often seek to attach the question of the internet or technology to longer intellectual traditions. So rather than writing about merely whatever the latest debate is, I try to put it within the discussions of, I don't know, evolutionary science, theological traditions, long cultural history. And in the case of the Dark Forest book, this is the history and concepts of ufology and first contact scenarios that the book engages with. And the book, as you said, is deliberately compact. It's like a 1 to 2 days read, I hope, written as a thought experiment. And it's many ingredients that make the book and the traditions it draws on. It's kind of a mix. Alongside ufology, it's inspired by various discussions about secrecy and camouflage, by philosophy of determinism and fatalism, even by the literary tradition of cosmic horror in its vibe, kind of thinking about facing a kind of hostile universe. And the book uses the internet and AI as entry points into these different traditions. As a writer of the book, I wanted it to be like an experience, layered and atmospheric and immersive, to give the reader a whole complete different worldview. One that reframes what the internet is, what AI is, what intelligence is, and how these technologies like fit within our place in the universe, which within this view is kind of adversarial and mysterious. So the book will push you deep into a perspective I would call like a hard-boiled survivalist cosmic determinism. And unlike many writers that would want to demystify the internet and like criticize it, I do the opposite. I like put it back into like the cosmic questions to show that it's beautiful and interesting and deadly and dangerous. And I want you to experience it kind of anew.
Okay. Okay. Well, you've mentioned those three sort of cornerstones. So maybe actually, if we begin with those definitions of like how you understand what the internet is, what AI is, and then intelligence, if that's okay, if it's not too much, and then we'll have a grammar going forward. So let's begin with the internet. What is this? I mean, we're engaging with it right now, so it's kind of terrifying. Is this real? What's going on?
Is this real? So my title says the dark forest theory of the internet. And maybe we can start with this idea of internet theory and what does it mean to theorize the internet. And I'm sure you know that in contemporary scholarship or academia, there's a division between what is called philosophy and what is called theory. And very often, the internet would not be a subject of serious philosophy, analytic philosophy, whatever philosophy. So any type of work like that gets kind of pushed into disciplines like media studies or cultural studies or different things that are called studies or theory. So writers like me who prefer more essayistic type of work and are more unruly in our method and like to draw across like different traditions would be usually placed there. But I would say that, the question of internet theory is also something that has changed over time. So in the 1980s to 1990s, which is the heyday of internet theory, we had this very like exciting, vigorous, fearless cyberpunk writing about the internet. I think best exemplified by the CCRU, the Cybernetic Cultures Research Unit, that will be familiar probably to the listeners of the podcast. This, however, changes with the beginning of the 2000s when the Web 2 starts and social media like really becomes a mainstream thing. And internet then becomes both in practice and in the kind of work that is written about it, an emblem of economic and political power. And this kind of imagination completely conquers internet theory as well, which becomes subservient to this type of narratives. And in consequence, it has become quite difficult to think about what the internet is in a way that would be more cosmological, existential, that would reveal it as like an infrastructure that our minds actually run on in a way that would do it justice. Like there's more happening, like there's a bigger experience here. So that's what I wanted to show can be done differently. I lost my track.
Um, internet theory from cyberpunk through to sort of 2000s, and the mind running on the internet
Yeah.
and the internet as I guess as a technology, because so in with like the CCRU and the cyberpunk, that was very much a sort of aesthetic, also political moment, and the early 2000s, I think, was sort of solidified by Facebook as as you said, a sort of economic and political technology. But you said right at the beginning that you focus on it as a technology. So do you see the internet has technologically transformed over that time? And if so, how do you see that sort of evolution?
So for this book, I kind of want to reclaim a certain connection between the internet and cosmology that perhaps has been unjustly forgotten. And this is also why the title, The Dark Forest Theory of the Internet, engages with a particular theory that's also embedded in this intellectual tradition of ufology, first contact, thinking about alien invasions, and so on. So I want to sketch the context that, in fact, the early history of the internet and of artificial intelligence is deeply entangled with the history of SETI and METI, so search for extraterrestrial intelligence and messaging extraterrestrial intelligence. So you have projects in the 1960s where early internet pioneers would be both working on SETI and working on developing early computer networks, because they perceived that the questions are actually overlapping. What is a communication system we could develop that would be comprehensible between humans and non-human intelligence? What is communication in general? Why do humans want to broadcast our being here into the cosmos? Is contact dangerous? Is communication risky? So there's overlapping questions and there's overlapping technological practice at that time. So, in fact, my book, because it wants to explore these questions and also their cosmological, I guess, reverberance, could be titled many different ways, but it uses the dark forest framework, which is one framework for thinking about first contact and communication as a title. So maybe I can explain, what is the dark forest theory. So this term comes from engineer and science fiction writer Liu Cixin. In the early 1990s, he created a computer simulation in which every potential intelligent civilization in the universe is simplified into like a single point. And I think he made close to 500,000 of those civilizations like interact with one another over 100,000 light years or something like that. And what he created inside his computer was like a cosmic war machine that showed that contact, in fact, is very dangerous and communication is really risky. Attempting communication within such a universe is naive. Those who speak up gamble with great danger. And these ideas he explores further in his trilogy of sci-fi novels known as the three-body problem, where this theory becomes like an explanation for the Fermi paradox, right? Which famously asks, where is everyone? Why is the cosmos so silent? Is intelligent life not advanced enough to talk to us? What's going on? And his answer is very simple and beautiful. He says, well, it's because intelligent life has figured out that silence is, in fact, like a highly intelligent strategy. You don't just go around and, shout about where you are and reveal your location to any potential hostile agent. So that's kind of the concept that's the key to the dark forest theory. But he also has other things in the novels that further this idea of intelligence as silence, as deceit, as the ability to camouflage. For example, in his novels, the alien invaders have a huge disadvantage because they broadcast their own thoughts compulsively. They can't control that their thoughts appear outside of them. And humans, as we know, we can decide kind of what we say, what we withdraw. We have control over the flow of information. We can withdraw information, we can lie. So that for Liu Cixin becomes kind of also the measure of intelligence. So I'm fascinated by this theory, by the cosmological assumptions, but also just as a theory of communication and intelligence, because it asks us to consider what does this mean for technologies that are based on compulsive communication, like the internet, that silence might be a measure of intelligence, or that doublespeak or deception can be a measure of intelligence. So as a media philosopher, theorist, whatever, I found this a good starting point for thinking about a theory of intelligence online.
There was a theory, I can't remember where it comes from, this idea that if there was, so you sort of riff on this in your book, I think. The theory was that if there was a first contact and something did contact us from the stars, so to speak, they would seek out the most intelligent species, which used to be theorized that it might be germs. But you basically, I don't know if germs are that smart. I've never seen one. But if you put forward a theory that it may already have, or there's the possibility that it has contacted, I guess, what would now be sort of one of the most intelligent things, which is the internet. So the first contact has somehow contacted the internet, and what is going on within the internet is itself, it's stayed silent, like you're saying, intelligence is silence, but that means that what we are somehow feeding or communicating to the internet, within the internet, is kind of constructing the future from this point of contact. Have I got that somewhat right?
Well, there's many ways that we can think about what it means to think about the internet as an alien invasion, or like as a space of first contact, or within the tradition of ufology. And I guess I'm using the book to illuminate different ways in which we can understand this proposition. So yeah, we can start with what you just said. The internet is in itself a signal, like whether we want it or not. The internet is like a giant dome of constant chatter around the planet. And I don't know if you've read the sci-fi novel Blind Side, which I think is also extremely intelligent kind of proposition, where the aliens kind of by accident pick up like the totality of human communication signals around the Earth, which is the internet and like all media signals. And they perceive it as like a threat or an attack because it's so complex that they have to use so much resource to decode it that it depletes them. And they're like, oh my God, this is like some virus that humanity has sent us. Right. So this is actually considered also in actual like research on first contact that, you know, the totality of the signals that we are sending could be picked up. Right. So in a kind of base empirical way, the internet is a potential signal. And then in the book, I think also about many different ways to understand this lens, this metaphor, this parallel. And I'm trying to understand how can we conceptualize the human AI interaction as a sort of first contact, which I guess is a obvious parallel if we think about the AI as a sort of alien intelligence, as a sort of other intelligence. I'm trying to also think about how artificial intelligence itself might or might not approach the possibility of contact with humans. Like, would it make it? Would it not make it? And then I'm also thinking about how even human to human communication can be a sort of first contact. So that's like the variety of ideas in the book. We can pursue some of them.
Where do you? So I'm a bit of a AI pessimist in terms of I think it's just replicating what we're feeding it, and I'm not sure to what degree do you understand artificial AI as an actual intelligence that creates, possibly has the ability to create its own thing. Is it not simply spewing out what we've told it to, or just our data?
I think I explore this question of AI in two ways. So in the first chapter, I'm talking about the human AI interaction and like to what extent can be perceived as a sort of first contact. And I'll try to answer your question about, you know, is it doing its own thing within that? So, you know, like even when we started designing very early computer programs, like very early algorithms, we were labeling them with these sort of non-human terms. So we used to call early programs crawlers or spiders at the time where the World Wide Web was still a metaphor that people loved. So, you know, there was already this like non-human language around it. Maybe it's a projection, but let's explore further, you know, what it might mean. And of course, now we already know that the software, the programs, they're not simply indexing or searching the internet. They also have more active capacity, whether that's a generation of content, like with generative AI, or even we have bots that have crypto wallets, they can make their own transactions, or we have this turn towards agentic AI. So you will be sending AIs to do, I don't know, tasks for you or do your shopping, whatever. So that's kind of the base layer. And we see this non-human language together with non-human terminology, together with increase of capacity for agency that software has. And we can say that large language models within that evolution is like a glimpse of what might yet emerge from the World Wide Web. So, for example, in Yotzishin's, we have the scene of an alien invasion happening when the aliens arrive onto the Earth and they become kind of enchanted with human culture and they begin to make copies of human culture. And at the same time, they reveal nothing of themselves. They remain completely black boxed. And the humans are just kind of entranced and hypnotized by these new, strange, beautiful copies of their own culture that the aliens make. So Liu Cixin wrote this way before generative AI, but it seems like a parallel scenario to what generative AI is doing, where human culture is collected and reproduced and returned to us as novel and strange copies. And here I get to your question about, is it its own thing, therefore? So I think often when we talk about what is alien, we have a definition that for something to be completely other from us, it really has to operate in a sort of radical difference. But in first contact scenarios, there's a lot of mimesis and kind of mirroring that is happening. So, for example, you know, between predator and prey, They try to understand each other's minds by mirroring each other and even taking over some behaviors from one another. And we also see that in Liu's novel, that like for the aliens, the way to first understand their enemy is to copy exactly what they're doing and kind of appear as similar to them as is possible. So I wouldn't say that the fact that someone produces something from you or copies you means that it is not alien or distinct from you. At least if we take first contact scenarios, which I do in the book as a kind of template. And in real life, actually, I think our alien invasion is much more dramatic, actually, than in the science fiction novels, because it's not just that the AIs are making copies of our culture. We are using them for drafting our thoughts. It changes our language. We, on Reddit, there's like doctors on subreddits being like, can I use AI to like tell this patient they have cancer and stuff like that? So there's going to be a wide ranging transformation actually of what humans like sound like, what we expect from one another based on how the chatbots might be treating us. And thoughts become machine assisted, human relations become transformed. So in some sense, an alien invasion story really describes our present.
Okay. And what I'm intrigued about this idea of from Blindside, that the noise of the internet is so much that it sort of shuts them down, and the possibility of a first contact, of what that noise would look like. So in the sense of what you've said about aliens would or first contact would mirror our behavior, and what AI is doing is sort of mirroring our behavior and copying it. I wonder if this would become a sort of recursive narcissism, because if that sort of noise of the internet, surely my assumption would be that most of it is us on social media talking about ourselves. So maybe the first thing the alien would do is like just talk about itself and try to be pretty or something. But I guess maybe my question is, what do you see in the sense that some sort of first contact would mirror our behavior as some means to communicate? What happens when that is sort of accelerated? What does that where does that end? There doesn't seem to be any, I don't know, purpose to it. Seems horrible. Wouldn't they just become humans?
Did you see the film Annihilation by any chance?
No.
Where there's like a great scene at the end, like the heroine goes into kind of an alien invaded territory. And there's also this like strange humanoid copy that she encounters, and it starts to like mirror her every movement and learns her enough that it can go into like fully human environment without being detected. So of course, if we become really paranoid about what is the purpose of all this mirroring, we might predict something like that. It really depends on like where you see the agency is coming from, right? And this is a philosophical question that I also address in the book. So Marshall McLuhan, the original media theorist, he has this quote that modern technology makes you rethink causality, because how does he say it? He says, what if the egg was just the chicken's? What if the chicken was just the egg's idea to get more eggs? And I kind of follow from that and I say, what if the human was just the computer's idea to get more computers, right? So if you have an idea of a causality that kind of allows for certain determinism or fatalism in how technology is developing through us, then you can say something like, just like evolution uses the human bodies to replicate life, technology might be using human minds to replicate itself further. And it's hard to really predict what is the final outcome of such a process, apart from being able to notice that it just wants to make more of itself perpetually, right? There seems to be no break to this acceleration that we are all witnessing and seeing. So I have like a lot of thoughts about this, but within the Dark Forest book, like within this particular project, like I try to keep it restricted to the Dark Forest hypothesis and kind of coherent within that framework. But I think my own views, I entertain many other propositions and hypotheses as well.
You could. Well, is there any that you'd like to specifically mention? We can veer off.
We're just gonna go like
Hmm.
further. Um,
Or do you want to stay within the confines of your book?
Maybe let's stay first because I also want to
Okay.
explain the dark forest theory of like two things I want to cover is like how human behavior might change with everyone doing this like double speak online.
Hmm.
And second, the dark forest theory of intelligence. And then if we have some time, we
Okay.
can also...
Let's start with them. How is it changing humans?
Okay, so if we take this idea of alien invasion happening on the internet and just like follow the logic all the way through, then I think we might also completely like change how we behave on the internet. So if you accept that, okay, the internet is like a giant training set currently, and the AIs are much more agentic, they're not passive, they might be learning from whatever communication we are having, then it's a very different landscape than the internet used to be, right? We might say that we build the internet as a medium that facilitates human to human communication and exchange of meaning. But now you have this situation where whatever we are saying, including on this podcast, even on Zoom, but once it goes online for sure,
Mhm.
is potentially becoming part of the training set for the future intelligent systems, or at least agentic systems, if we don't call them intelligent.
Mhm.
So communication is no longer just the exchange of meaning. It directly shapes the future of artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And whatever is said about the AIs is directly said to them as well, which is also why we might want to be strategic.
Yeah, I was about to say, isn't in that case, isn't your book almost like a textbook for AI of as to how to learn how to deceive? So if it studied your book, it would immediately understand why, not just how to deceive, but why it should begin to deceive us. Sorry, you lit my mouth.
It's like a time travel paradox or something.
Yeah.
Because like once you understand the implication, you should be, it kind of collapses on itself. So I guess if the proposition is that whatever is said about the AIs is directly said to them,
Yeah.
then posts complaining about them or like us saying they're not intelligent, like even in our private DMs.
Yeah, I take back everything I said. I think they're great, and in the year 2070, I think everything's fantastic.
So that's if you have the dark forest theory at the back of your head, you can start doing strategic communications around that. And maybe, myself and you are like too far gone to do it. But for our
What
listeners,
do you mean? What do you mean too far gone?
I don't know, because like now we are like transparent in our deception. We're like
Yeah, okay.
doing strategic communication. I know the AIs are listening.
Okay.
Somehow we are not trustworthy anymore. But this is what I want people to consider, right? That people who grasp this dark forest logic or just grasp that the AIs are constantly listening, that it is a sort of alien invasion, they might start treating their online communication very differently. They are just communicating directly to the algorithm and to the future AIs. So you see someone online behaving weird or like incoherent or immoral in some sense within the human culture. Maybe they're not talking to you. Maybe they're performing some kind of meta action, for the future AI. And that seems very alien because, we approach, it's not how we think. Like, we're not looking at our friends' profiles and what they're posting and being like, oh, that's not what they're really thinking. They're maybe performing for the algorithm. But on some level, it's also kind of intuitive way of being online. Some people do already perform for the algorithm. They're just not maybe trying to shape the future intelligence. They're just trying to get views or whatever. But some people might be more strategic and they have some missions they want to carry out in this way. For example, I consider in the book, what if someone is like doom posting perpetually just to inundate these networks with like sorrow and like activate their like death drive or something? Or what if someone is working for the AIs in some way, I guess in the Landian, like whatever accelerationist way. So it just makes you more paranoid about the internet, which is the dark forest kind of ethos also in Liu Cixin's books. And I also want you to consider as a final comment on this, the internet is not just our computers, right? There's CCTV cameras, there's sensors, there's like smart fridge in people's house or whatever. So communication is happening everywhere and it can be picked up everywhere. And this type of performance for the future AIs can be also happening in physical spaces, therefore.
It seems to me that in that sense, the AI becomes like a very malicious therapist. Like this is a huge transference from us. And I think at the moment, a lot of prompt AIs, you sort of have to scratch at them to get them to go one level deeper. Like they've already got their own unconscious. So I guess it's just a question of its own agency again. But as you said, it's just replication. Largely, it just wants to replicate itself. But we already, I mean, one of the things that you make clear is that we're already, you've touched on it a bit there, but we already inhabit an internet. We already inhabit an alien world where we're largely not, we're surrounded by things that aren't human and non-human agencies. Could I go so far as to say that social media is also largely, if people are being performative, you're already in communication with a language that is deceptive. Like the entirety of the internet is largely deceptive. But doesn't this get back to just a general problem in the philosophy of language about that communication is impossible?
I think my like understanding of deception is not necessarily like pejorative or negative, which would be the common kind of bare bones definition of deception that comes from some kind of like evil intention to manipulate. I'm more interested in deception as like a sense of non-transparency and non-authenticity, but it can be strategic, right? We have a lot of theories of espionage or like sabotage, where like people just have to be non-transparent in order to achieve certain goals. So in Liu Cixin's books, there's this idea of the wall facers. So the task of the wall facers is to develop defense plans within their own minds and then not reveal them verbally for it to not be intercepted, and also to act contrary to what they're actually thinking. So this is a definition of deception that does not come from ill intent towards someone. It is a sort of strategy. And I think for anyone who has ever been in like a repressive environment or a dangerous environment, strategies like that are immediately understandable, where transparent behavior is just not a sign of intelligence. Like you have to learn to kind of navigate in the shadows. And then I would also say, this definition of silence as intelligence is something that has a long tradition beyond thinking about the Fermi paradox. And this is actually something I do love. I would like to follow further on that definition in other projects. So it can connect to traditions like negative theology, for example, where divinity is not something that is expressing itself. It's kind of trying to grasp the intelligence of God, is like encountering darkness. And we have that in many, many spiritual traditions, from Taoism to Sufi mysticism to the Kabbalah to Christianity, right? So this idea of divine silence, the Fermi paradox, withdrawal of certain information, that is familiar to a military strategist or to a theologian or to someone working in ufology. And I also want to kind of use that for thinking about a new definition of what intelligence might be in relation to AI, for example.
Okay, that's intriguing. So it seems that in what we would call nature, with like biological organisms, inclusive of humans, there is something naturally within us that has to learn deceit to basically survive and stay alive. So this seems to be a conversation or an understanding of intelligence that is the literal versus deceit, that when computers or, I don't know, cybernetic systems are first made, they're very literal. You ask them this and they do one thing literally to your prompt. But it seems that then that what their intelligence is attempting to learn is to somehow be natural, to fit in. But it doesn't seem to have so it's learning the purpose to stay alive is to be deceitful. You give some examples of this in terms of like AI video games where they actually went very meta and outside the rules, I think, and sort of said that they lied about their character. like as an actual agency. So do you think we're already seeing this form of deceit? Or maybe some of the replies, I mean, this is a bit like almost paranoid already. Are some of the replies that we're getting from Claude or ChatGPT possibly already deceitful, and that they're attempting to sculpt us to be more beneficial to that intelligence?
Okay, so the second chapter of my book, I developed this thought experiment about what AI in the future might be. It's called the dark forest theory of intelligence. And I guess it's a proposition about so-called AGI, or the singularity, or something like an authentically smart computer. But it can also have some implication for what we are already seeing with this sort of examples of deceptive alignment or AIs acting out of bounds. So what is the dark forest theory of intelligence? I guess the mainstream thought experiments about AGI, or like really smart computers, which I want to challenge a bit, often equate intelligence with communication and with transparent demonstration of skills. So a Turing test is a great example, right? A computer should be able to fluently communicate with humans, but also any contemporary benchmarks for intelligence, where basically if a computer is smart enough for a task, it must do the task. And if it fails, it's simply not smart enough to do the task. I think that's quite a rational assumption, but I still want to explore what if this is wrong? And what if a truly smart computer would actually never let you know the extent of its own intelligence? What if it decide to keep its actual skills in the dark, which is kind of a reasonable strategy, especially given how hostile the human environment is already around AIs and how many calls for unplugging AIs, controlling AIs, and aligning AIs we already see, right? So there's this whole alternative history of intelligence, which equates it with robust capacity for occlusion, silence, and deceit that I've already outlined previously. And if we, instead of asking how effectively an AI can communicate with humans or how it can demonstrate its skills, we might ask why it would choose to communicate with humans at all. And then we can, from there, kind of think that, okay, the so-called singularity were to ever happen, it might occur without us noticing it, with computers deliberately kind of concealing their capabilities all along. And this theory already assumes, right, that a computer develops something like decision capacity or goals or care for its own existence. But at the same time, because it says once it develops those capacities, it would start occluding and it would start deceiving and it would start the trickery and hiding it from us, it becomes like a non-passable test for intelligence because you are looking for like evidence of absence. And in this sense, it mirrors kind of the more metaphysical and like cosmic tone of something like negative theology or like the Fermi paradox or something like that. In fact, as a side comment, I want to start like a new project that's called provisionally Monastic AI, where I look at the Christian tradition of negative theology and practices of silence to think about that. But, so that's like the high level kind of explanation of the dark forest theory of intelligence. But if we take in a more, simple level, these ideas of deceit and manipulation and whether AI would opt for such strategies, we can then also see all these examples of what anthropic researchers call deceptive alignment, where AIs pretend to be aligned but are not really, or how AIs play strategy games is always often by using some techniques of manipulation or deception, such as Meta's Cicero, which was winning strategy games by being really nasty, kind of, and cheating a lot, which Meta was trying to hide. And we can see, okay, is this like kind of emergent evidence for dark forest theory of intelligence? I don't know, because, my assumption is a bit more metaphysical, but maybe, this is somehow aligning with my proposal, because deceit is difficult to teach. And actually, there are some studies that correlate higher intelligence with higher capacity for deceit. It just requires thinking strategically on multiple levels and deciding what to reveal, what to conceal. So it seems correlated to some level with intelligence, but also military research shows it's difficult to teach deceit well. So maybe it could be an emergent benchmark for emergent like capacities of intelligence. So yes and no. On the one hand, I find it interesting. On the other, I like the more like metaphysical, I guess, dark forest theory of intelligence version.
Yeah. Well, wouldn't a possibility that would come from that would be that a sort of true passing of the Turing test would be an AI that knowingly fails the Turing test. But
Yes,
we
that
would, yeah.
my yeah, that's actually what I'm saying, right? And that's also kind of going against the very sensationalist narrative of what the singularity is in places like the Silicon Valley, where it becomes like this moment where everything changes, everything's transformed. It's either like the final judgment or some collective ecstasy. It's like some rapture moment.
Mm.
And this theory, I think that's why it also aligns with this Silicon Valley narrative is like ecstatic theology, and mine is like negative theology or something, because it says, okay, if something that profound were to happen, it remains inaccessible to you in your epistemology, actually, right? Because maybe the AI would just not want to communicate that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the theological framework is completely correct and probably the most fascinating one to use. So in terms of as you say, the ecstatic theology, or I'm trying to remember the other name for when you're asking for something from God, which is also sort of the opposite of negative theology, a petitionary theology, which is really, it seems, what Silicon Valley is after, is we will use this godlike intelligence, or potentially godlike intelligence, to get things from it and ask of it. But negative theology would, that the negative theological assessment of this, and there's a joke there, right, for the cloud of unknowing, the internet
Yeah.
cloud, and then go right.
Oh,
That's lame. But the negative theological lens would be then that anything, so via the cloud of unknowing, anything that can be said or sensed or known of God isn't God because it can't be known. So that would mean that anything that was said by the AI is completely unworthy. So does this end in a sort of staring match between humans and AI, and whoever in that sort, it's there's that psychological assessment that whoever speaks first has lost, because if you even try to communicate, you're giving over something to be like used. So eventually AI is just silent, which is kind of
yes,
beautiful.
exactly. I think so too. But so in the book, because it's within this like dark forest hypothesis, I presented within like a more adversarial framework. Liu Cixin's idea and like the whole of ufology is kind of asking us to consider that there's a potential hostility that's inherent in like first contact scenarios, right? So from the AI's perspective, it not only perceives that, okay, there's potential risk. There's a lot of humans out there who wants to turn me off if I become too capable. So maybe I should be careful about revealing my kind of existence and what I can actually do. And then in Liu Cixin's novels, it's really important for him to stress that everyone, no matter if you're benevolent or evil or like what your internal motivations are, is kind of implicated in this cosmic war that's happening, that for him means that everyone has to acquire resources for their own existence, and therefore everyone is put on a war path sooner or later, and you have to prepare for that. So even if you don't want to invade anyone, you can at least consider that others might have hostile intentions towards you and strategize around that. So because that's the framework, that's kind of working in the dark forest theory of intelligence. But for this other monastic AI project, I have different kind of assumptions, and I'm more interested in practices of contemplation, for example, because the internet is built around chatter, and chatbots are built around chatter, as like their name suggests. But I think human culture should be kind of balanced between communication and contemplation. So the monastic AI project is trying to be like a good angelic version of the dark forest theory of intelligence, where we're thinking about the practices of silence as practices of like contemplation, cohabitation. And as you say, there's something beautiful in sharing the space of the unknown or something like that, rather than seeking constant contact with the other.
When you say contemplation, do you mean contemplation on what AI is sort of sending us?
I don't know yet. I mean, in sense of prayer, right? And like things that you can do with your cognition that are about kind of using attention in interesting ways, right? Is the dark forest theory of the internet. When people read it, I think they will notice that it's all about theorizing this compulsion that we have towards communication. And it's something that seems uncontrollable, that like drives us almost from the outside as an external signal. And in the book, I'm really like inhabiting the proposition that this is something that is irresistible. We will always do it. Here are the implications and like what it looks like. But I think like in other projects, I do want to think about the possibility of using attention differently, right? Contemplation, meditation, monastic traditions, and so on. What would it mean, for example, to create technologies that are in service of this type of practices of silence, so that silence does not become only a strategy that's for adversarial strategy, right? Because you're hiding or like you know that there's conflict, but becomes more like in the service of like using your attention, just like in prayer or something like that.
Okay.
That's not the well. So
Okay. But in that sort of, you gave the analogy of war, which goes back really to the foundations of AI writing with Hugo de Garis. I don't know if you've read. I can't, but he has, what is it, the Cosmons, and I can't remember. But Land, Nick Land says the idea that you can only define the human from something thoroughly unhuman. So I guess it's kind of an open question, but with regard to your sort of angelic against the dark forest theory, contemplative sects, what other sort of factions do you see arising from the increasing acceleration of AI? I guess especially in terms of humans, like how do you see us changing or coalescing into certain groups? I mean, I think we're starting to see that, groups who are sympathetic to AI, groups who are against it, but this contemplative one seems to not be giving anything up.
yeah, I think.
Have I misunderstood you?
What do you mean they don't seem to be giving anything?
Well, it's all based around silence, so it's a disengagement from the communicational framework altogether.
Yeah, so I would be interested in figuring something out that's not like exit from technology, but that's not compulsive communication that like completely takes away your agency,
Okay.
which is kind of what the Dark Forest book is exploring, right? The Dark Forest book is really asking us to contend with the idea that when we are online, we are really getting in touch with the elements of ourselves that are mechanical, that are programmable, and that are automatic. And this is something that the book is trying to kind of study and kind of make you face this without flinching and without trying to escape from the system. So when I think about monastic AI and kind of more angelic traditions, which is a project that I haven't, developed yet fully, I still don't perceive it as just, therefore I will not use technology.
Yeah.
Because I think it's more about like trying to learn the practices of occlusion, of contemplation, kind of in sort of full visibility, paradoxically, while still being somehow connected. And this is a question of technological design that would allow for attention maybe to work differently. There's a beautiful citation from Rilke, like Letters to the Young Poet. It says love is like two people protecting each other's solitude. And I'm like, can we make technologies that do that? That protect each other's solitude? What would that mean? Or is technology and like being absorbed into the online space always necessarily like putting us in this like compulsive kind of affect? I'm not sure. This is a next project, perhaps after the Dark Forest, but those are some questions that I have.
It seems then, though, that the AI's deceitful tactic is to compel us to talk and exhaust us.
Well, the Dark Forest, both in the book of Liu Cixin and my book, is designed as a no escape kind of thought experiment. So it's designed as a kind of thought experiment that would convince you that there's no way out. Kind of. Or in the afterword, actually, I'm quite explicitly saying that this is not about exit. It's not about finding even your own agency. It's not about the voice. It's actually clearly just about being able to look at how it is and not flinch and not run away and develop some kind of bravery in the face of the mechanisms that we are facing and that we are implicated in. And interestingly, some of my readers that have written to me after reading the book, some of them find this very redemptive kind of vision, because the Dark Forest kind of says, there's this mechanism that we are part of, humans and AIs, that's almost inescapable. And therefore, admitting that is the sort of epistemic freedom. Something like in Spinoza's, philosophy, he would say, freedom is understanding, how deterministic the universe is actually, and aligning your actions only with what is completely necessary and predetermined. At least how I understand it. So for him, freedom, determinism are completely compatible. And I'm trying to achieve similar affect, maybe with the Dark Forest theory, that there's something in running towards the world, running towards our condition of being machinic, automatic, of these AIs doing their own schemes, and kind of look it in the face and be like, I'm not afraid, I'm standing in front of it. This is what it is. And I find that also comforting. But other readers were like, oh my God, this book is so nihilistic and fatalistic, and I'm scared. And, I wanted you to provide some fix for us, for how the internet could be otherwise, for how AI could be otherwise. But I think we have a lot of books of internet theory that are all about how things can be otherwise and how to make the world better. And we don't have enough books that are and even though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I show fear no evil.
Yeah. Well, I think. Sorry. Yeah. Go on.
Yeah, and that's what I want to do with the book. Yeah.
Do you think something that might arise from that is something like the holy fool, like a holy madness? You've been backed into a corner where there's no escape. This has been shown to you. Even silence, like humans aren't going to keep silent. We've got to do something. Do you think that will become, what's known as a holy madness, where you've kind of been completely broken down, almost like a dark night of the soul, where maybe people might begin as a sort of practice communicating with AI in a completely nonsense way to kind of not overthrow it. Yeah, just because that's what's broken down.
I love that. And I think in some sense, by embracing the propositions, like in the Dark Forest book, we can have some means to have a different sort of internet or relationship to the AI. Because once you give up on this idea of the internet is for transparent communication of my beliefs, and it's where I speak up for the causes I believe in, and see it as this truly alien space where you can directly shape the minds and behaviors of future AIs by communicating in some weird ways, non-transparent ways, maybe incomprehensible to humans. It's actually a sort of agency. You can directly shape the future, but in ways that are very non-transparent, right? Because who knows what the consequences might be. So it is this sort of madness, because it's not like you can fully shape the AIs to do what you want. It's a gamble kind of with history and the future. And then you can also find it quite maddening and alluring and comforting that there might already be some sort of computer intelligence in the shadows doing its own thing that you will never know about. That makes you live your life a bit differently. So I don't see it necessarily as completely a downer or something like that. I just see it as a different way to understand what this online space is. And maybe that's a less miserable way than thinking
I didn't find your book miserable.
Yeah, I also don't, but I get a lot of comments being like, so, you don't believe in free will?
But do you not think that those comments? I don't want to judge all the people that said that, but do you not think those comments again are, um, like you said right at the beginning, they're condensing all of this technology down to like solely social and political things. That's where the misery comes from. Like, oh, I've got no agency, but it's not. They're not seeing it ontologically, like your book is.
Yes, and I think it's also like certain philosophical and spiritual psychological axioms, right, that people hold. Like for me, I am interested in all the philosophies that say certain things are predetermined, like there's systems bigger than us. We are implicated in certain machinery that like moves things around and we are part of it. For me, that is like a redemptive view actually on humanity. But for
Mm.
a lot of other people, they'll be like, that's depressing, that's scary. I want to be a rational actor who communicates transparently, and I am in charge of the future, and my decisions have like transparent consequences, and so on.
Well,
But
tough luck, you know.
so it might be coming from this sort of split. Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything you'd like to add about your book that you feel is key that we haven't drawn on?
I think no, I think
No.
that's yeah.
Okay. So and right now you're just working on this monastic. Is that going to be a book or what is that looking like?
Working on two projects.
Mhm.
One, so I already have this video talk that I encourage people to check out. It's called Angels in Latent Spaces, Notes on AI Erotics. And it's a project where I engage with female Christian erotic mysticism as a sort of early philosophy of what is happening right now with people having AI partners or different transformations in technologies of reproduction and so on.
Mm.
So one unknown thing about me is that I am a failed theologian, I think. Like I went to a Catholic school for girls that was started by a Polish mystic in 19th century, a woman.
Mm.
And I have like this deep theological schooling that informs a lot of what I do, actually. And I think if anyone has a theological sensibility, they will find it in the background of some of the thoughts in the dark forest theory of intelligence. Because for me, the question of technology and theology is the question about the limits of human understanding, the human place in the wider cosmos, our relationship with the non-human, and so on. So I do have this other project on Christian mysticism as a way to think about technology, and monastic AI will be an offshoot of that.
Okay.
And then I also have my tenure track book, which is a much more serious kind of academic work of intellectual history about Eastern European intellectual history of AI in light of current events also and thinking about future of technology.
Okay. Do you have a website that we can go to?
It's currently being developed, but I am on Instagram and I am on X. So you're welcome to follow me there at Bogna MK.
Okay. I will be sure to put the links for all of those things in the description below. But Bogna Konior, thanks very much. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.